The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Association of MBAs webinar, an alternative model for quality projects. This is part of a Global Connections MBA refresher webinars launched to follow on from the success of our regular CPD certified MBA refresher events. This series will allow more of our members across the globe to access the knowledge of our accredited business schools and their academics. The MBA refresher webinars are designed to take you back to school and bring you up to speed with one core topic covered by the MBA program in today's business environment. Global Connections are a series of events and webinars organized by our global ambassadors. The global ambassadors are part of our global network of accredited MBA alumni, nominated by their business schools to serve their peers and promote the value of accredited MBA education. Today, I will hand you over to Dr. Peter Flett, who is currently a teaching fellow at the University of Strathclyde in the Strathclyde Business School and the Department of Management Science. Previously, he was an engineer in the electrical supply industry and IT. His PhD was in the field of project management, investigating the relevance of quality systems in a project-based environment. As ever, Dr. Flett is happy to take questions at the end of the session, so please do send them in as we go along, and I'll present these afterwards. The slides also will be available with video of the webinar and the audio, in case you've missed anything. So I'm going to hand over to Peter now, and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks very much, Tim. Hello, everyone. My name's Peter Flett, and as Tim said, I work as a senior teaching fellow at Strathclyde Business School in Glasgow, which is based in Scotland in the north of the UK, for those of you who don't know where we are. Scotland probably being one of the most beautiful countries in the world, which you should come and visit straight away. And that's the pitch for the Scottish Tourist Board over. Just to give you a little bit of history about me, where I've come from and what my background is. Before I came into academia, I was a high voltage cable engineer. I had worked for a company, worked my way up through the company with no real formal qualifications, and worked on both overhead lines and high voltage cables, typically called supertension cables, which would be up to about 400,000 volts. I decided, because of no formal qualifications, or my wife got fed up with me moaning about not having formal qualifications, to go to university as a mature student, although I should state that I am still learning and will no doubt continue to learn till I drop. And my first degree is actually in management science with engineering, which was gained at the University of Stirling, where I then went on to do my PhD, which is in the role of quality in projects. I live in a small rural town called Crieff, which is in the middle of Scotland. I'm married with 2 teenagers, and I have a dog called Sky, who's probably, Sky is wonderful because she's the main person who greets me at night and is always pleased to see me. Yeah, I'm very lucky to be also working at the Strathclyde Business School, probably the top business school in Scotland as well. Today's topic, what I want to do in project management, the project triangle has three areas, and one of those areas is quality. Now, there's a lot of talk of quality being built into projects and being built into manufacturing and operations management and project management, but actually it's not often discussed. It's not often analysed in depth, and I think sometimes it's just taken as a given. So when I was doing my PhD, I decided to look at quality and look at how project organisations implement quality systems, whether they're actually effective or not, and whether they make a difference to the outcome of the project, and whether project organisations learn from the mistakes they make in projects. Because one of the things I found in my working life as a project engineer was that we tended to repeat mistakes. Projects would maybe be done in one location and then in a different location, and maybe there were slightly different issues in each of these locations, but we would repeat the same mistakes. this is a theme I'll talk about a little more later on in the presentation, because obviously projects are finite things, and quite often they're made up of disparate project teams who come from different places as well, who fragment once they finish the project. But I'll talk about this a little bit later on. So I want to look at how can project organisations learn from their mistakes, or just learn effectively. Is there a better way to measure quality? Can the systems world provide better representations of the behaviour of project organisations? When I was looking at my case studies when I did my PhD a number of years ago, it was quite clear that project organisations had behaviours that were fairly unique, and I ended up looking at the system world to see if I could identify or find models that would fit with these behaviours, and actually came across a few archetypes from Peter Senge that seemed to fit quite well, and adapted them accordingly. This is not aimed to be a definitive model or a definitive way to measure quality. It's just some ideas and alternative ways of looking at quality. And if you'd like to take these ideas further or use them or discuss them, I'm more than happy to speak with people at a later date, or email or Skype or whatever. I'd be quite happy to take this further, because I haven't. It'd be useful to take it further and use it in other contexts. Most of the material from this lecture can be downloaded from the URL you see at the bottom of slide 3, and please feel to disseminate it as you see fit, and criticise it accordingly as well. Okay, why quality? Well, when I was an engineer, way back in the 80s now, it seems like a long time now, I first encountered quality systems. Quality systems like British Standard 5750 was introduced to me in 1985 by a very good engineer that I respected heavily, and it was on a large high voltage cable project in Glasgow, putting in a 275 kV cable from one end of the city to the other, which actually provided power for at least half of the city. And the way it was introduced to me was actually, well, if we standardise a lot of what we do, it means that there's a certain modularity about how you can work as an engineer. So if I was posted to another site in another location in the UK or even overseas, the drawing system, how the office was set up, how the site safety operated would be all standard, and therefore there'll be an improvement. It would be better. People would know how we want to work. There'd be standard procedures, which would also be able to help in training new members of the project team, all of which I felt was a really good idea. The issue for me happened when quality systems became operationalized and became embedded, and the actual rationale for them in improving quality seemed to disappear. It seemed to be more about a bureaucracy, it seemed to be more about checklists, about tick boxes, and it wasn't tackling the fundamental problems with quality. There was a quality industry sprung up. Now, please forgive me if you work in the quality industry as an auditor or quality assurance engineer. This is not a personal slight on you, it's just an observation of that period of time and how quality evolved. And whilst I think there's been a number of issues ironed out with quality systems and the standards, which then moved on to the international ISO standards, I still think there are issues around the context of how they're applied. And I've put a couple of clips on this slide about some large infrastructure projects in the UK and in Scotland that have failed very badly. So there obviously is something wrong when large-scale projects continually fail at vast amounts of money, and I'm sure you can find examples from your part of the world as well. There's very seldom a week goes by when newspapers are reporting about project failure. Some of these projects are colossal amounts of money. The NHS IT project that recently has been happening in the UK that's been scrapped is costing £11 billion, and a lot of that money isn't going to be recouped. So there seems to be an issue as to how we look at quality, how things are done, we seem to make mistakes time and time again. We're not learning from them. And that's just one of the simple things that I was looking at in my PhD, and I'm going to talk about here. Here's my worldview of quality. And I apologize for my pronunciation here, is it Weltanschauung in German, the worldview, my worldview, which is from a middle-aged 50-year-old ex-engineer who works in academia. This is how I interpreted what quality control, quality management and total quality management were. So for me, the existing quality model of quality control was actually, in a project level, was meeting the specification. Nothing more, nothing less. Quality management was kind of moving on the project level to actually meeting the real requirements. So you might have the specification or the bill of quantities for the project, but actually as a project team, you realize that the customer or client possibly needed more than just what was being specified. The intangibles that most project organizations provide as well, their expertise and knowledge, and how they can guide the client to get the product or service they actually want at the end of the project. And then you moved on to total quality management. And to me, total quality management interprets to learning and improving from the project experience. You have a project, you do something, things go very well, or things could go really badly during the project. You might meet your deadlines, you might not, but how do we improve from that? How do we learn from that in the future? And I think that's where there's been a gap in a number of organizations over the years, and that's where these failures creep in. As I've said here, your worldview of quality might be different. You might see things quite differently from me, which is perfectly fine and perfectly valid. Okay, just looking at that last level, so concentrating on level 3, the learning and improving from the project experience. Typically, we all learn to walk by falling down. We pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, and we start walking again, then we learn to run, and so on and so forth. During a typical project, and projects are very seldom typical just by their very nature, there's always something that's unique to that project. That's what makes it a project and not an operation. The individual learns from things that go wrong and things that go really well. That individual in the project team takes that experiential knowledge with them when they go to the next project. Obviously, all of us as individuals, and organizations are no different because we're just collections of individuals, don't like to admit making mistakes. And what happens during projects when mistakes are made, and actually there's a solution found usually, because project management's very much a practitioner sport, and you have to resolve problems, usually on the spot, so that next event or activity can take place. But quite often, this knowledge, this how we resolved something is lost because it's wrapped up in a particular incident where something went wrong. And actually people don't want to admit to that mistakes. It's human nature. We don't want to admit our mistakes. Therefore, the problem is we're in danger of repeating those mistakes. The other thing as well, we tend not to remember the mundane. We tend not to remember the day-to-day things that happened. Interestingly, when I was looking at this presentation a couple of days ago, I thought about the film Apollo 13, fantastic film about the failure of the trip to the moon by the Apollo 13 space mission. And interestingly, of all the space, I grew up during these space missions as a young lad, and used to follow them with fascination on old black and white TV. And it was a huge thing in those days, and those were amazing projects. But interestingly, the Apollo mission they decide to make into a film is the one where arguably there was a failure en route to the moon, and the astronauts and the team on the ground had to work very hard to get them back. And as I think one of the characters in the film says, it's, you know, they want it to be their greatest success, not NASA's greatest failure. But it was interesting that they made a film about a mistake. So that's what people remember. We don't remember the things the mundane things that went okay. And one of the criticisms I had of existing quality systems, generic ISO systems, were that they tended to capture mundane, routine things that are very easy to measure and in the grand scheme of things not actually important. Obviously there's a caveat to that. When you're looking at things like quality control in aircraft and other mission critical industries, quality control is a key issue, but I don't think that's quite what the same as quality systems are. I think sometimes the translation of these things to a project environment doesn't work, and they don't capture the ethos of continuous improvement and how they can improve. The danger of repeating mistakes, well, it's more of an issue for project organisations because we obviously, when you do projects, the project team can change. So looking at the issues of learning from projects and learning in project team members, they move from project to project. That can be intercompany, it can be inter-country, it can be internationally. And as I said before, they learn from experience, but then you lose personnel at each project, either by the nature of how the organisation is set up or by the nature of the work. It might be that the staff have to be quite mobile, and when they finish a project, for example, Tim, who I was just speaking to, who very kindly introduced me here to this webinar, he was working in the Olympic Games last year, and a fantastic project that has gone very, very well. It's been a huge success in the UK, but he is now working in something else because obviously Olympic Games only appear every 4 years. So certain projects lend themselves to once they're finished, they're finished. So he's moved away with all that knowledge and experience, but then how do you replicate it? Here in Glasgow, next year we have the Commonwealth Games, which is rather like a scaled-down Olympic Games, and already the planning is going on for that just now. And interestingly, unless you get personnel who've been to Olympic Games and other Commonwealth Games and have experience of large sporting events, that knowledge is lost. And this is the problem of projects and learning, is that knowledge doesn't feed forward into other projects apart from an individual. And if you're an organisation that does these projects, retaining your staff is very, very important, but that's also not always possible. So we lose the organisational learning from the project that could feed forward into the other project, and this can either prevent the same mistakes being made, or it can reduce the capability of the organisation because they've not realised a new method or a work technique that was used on the project which could have enhanced future projects. So not a particularly complex issue, it's rather a sort of lessons learned issue, and how can we enhance this and make this better. Now going to look at a couple of video clips which encapsulate for me the issues with existing quality systems. Now my hypothesis is that measuring capability is possibly a better indicator of a quality company and a quality process. Now the example of these particular, this video comes from an operations environment, not a project environment, but I believe it applies equally as well to projects as it does to operations. It's what I'm trying to say about capability. The clips are taken from an old series, an old TV series in the UK done by Channel 4 called Better by Design, where two designers, Richard Seymour and Dick Powell, took everyday objects and tried to enhance their functionality. And interestingly, they looked at how the products were built and how they could improve them for the consumer. And these were very standard everyday objects, and one of these objects were a toilet and how you improve it. So for their initial research, the designers first of all visited a toilet factory. I think it was in the East Midlands in England. The toilet factory was called Shires, and they visited what they did with the quality engineer there and how they tested the toilets, and then they went to Japan to show how it was done there. And these two clips really encapsulate what I believe is the issue with existing quality systems at the moment in the project environment. Now, we've got a slight technical issue here that we discovered the other day, that I can show the video but the sound is not going to come through. So if you excuse me here, I'm going to do a dialogue over the video to try and actually put forward what the video is saying. So I'm not a trained actor, but hopefully you'll get the idea of what's happening with the clip. So first of all, this is toilet testing as it's done in the UK. So the two designers are being shown around the factory in the East Midlands, and this is how they test toilets in the United Kingdom. So it's a labour-intensive craft, more related to the potter's craft and manufacturing science, and as part of that it's just knowing how the clay will shrink and distort in the heat. After that, after it's shrunk, the toilet has to pass the exact British standard flushing test. So first of all we'll get the quality engineer, and he gets a BS British standard ball that's a certain diameter weight, that's the laid down standard. So that's what he's shown to designers just now. And so the designer's saying it's a stimulated stool. Yeah. And then he says drop it in. And so the quality engineer drops in this simulated stool, flushes the toilet, and it goes through. And the designer says, how many balls can it take? And it's got to pass that test 4 times out of 5. But how many balls? Only one. Just the one, he says. Just the one BS ball. But it's a very small ball. You know, another designer picks up and goes, the only thing that a consumer watching us do this would think that it's nothing like the real thing. And the engineer said, well, that's a British standard test. But you don't agree. They don't often come looking like that, do they? Well, I've got to agree with that, says the engineer. He says, I bet that cost a fortune because it's to specification. And the other designer says, this is a stool dummy like you get in car tests. So yeah, so that's how they test toilets in the UK. They take a British standard ball that's a certain weight, certain diameter, and then flush it down the toilet. There only has to be one ball goes through that space 5 times. They don't put multiple things down. Now we'll see how they do it in Japan, slightly differently. So this is them. They've come to the research department where the new ideas are tested. And again, we've got a sort of the Japanese equivalent of the quality assurance engineer. And oh, sorry, let's go back one here and get this started. So this is them testing in Japan. I hope you've all had your dinner. This is a bit yucky looking. So what they're doing, they're using soya beans mixed with polystyrene beads, and the designer's asking why you're using polystyrene, and he's saying, oh, it's for buoyancy. And yes, that'll make it float and make it stand up, and the designers are saying, yeah, very good, very realistic. And as you can see already, it's far closer to the real thing than the British test, horribly so. And when the designer says, oh good God, and then he looks a bit queasy, he's struggling a wee bit with this test, and as you can see, he's not looking very well there. And then they put paper in as well, obviously a key facet of a toilet in the West and many parts of the world, and they all laugh as it flushes away. And the designer says, now that's what I call a test. So that's my point, is that the UK, the clear difference was, in the UK there was an adherence to a quality standard. There was no resemblance to the actual task the toilet was needed to perform. Whereas in Japan, the quality test was about capability. Tim is going to put these videos up on the AMBA website so you can look at them in their entirety, and they'll probably be in the YouTube recording as well. So if you have any problems, you need to see them with the proper video dialogue, just give me a shout and I can email them to you. So my question would be, if a quality system does not measure true capability, is it a true quality system? Next of all, we'll look at a small case study about what can go wrong in a project, very small project, and how you could learn from it and how in this particular case the learning didn't take place. But this is a project I did when I was doing my PhD. While I was doing my PhD, I was finding it difficult to get primary data. So I ended up going back to my old occupation as a cable engineer to actually do a project and use that as primary data, which the company agreed to. So first of all, I'll just give you a quick guidance on how to install a high voltage cable in stages and sort of work breakdown structure. Simplistic approach, but putting in cables is fairly basic engineering, so you can always use this yourself. So first of all, you dig a long hole in the road, a long trench, preferably a busy road if you want to cause lots of chaos. You put in a long cable in a long hole. Supertension cables can be up to 500 meters, kilometre long, so you create quite a bit of havoc when you go through a major city doing this. Then you backfill it with, well, cement-bound sand, gravel and a tar topping. Well, the tar can be a bit pricey, so sometimes you've got to look at other materials. Then you repeat that a number of times, making sure the cables are put end to end. Join the cables together, join the bits at the end to a power source and to your consumers, and then you switch it on. As I say, there's the full details and the uninterrupted details in that document if you follow that URL. Here's the breakdown structure of who does it as well. You have civil engineering work, so you've got teams of guys who do the actual digging, the laying of the cable. Then you've got a separate team coming in to do the jointing works. Now these joints for large cables can take a week to prepare and then a couple of days to actually joint, and they're actually very expensive as well, some of them. In the larger cables, the 275 kV cables and 400 kV cables, they can be up to £30,000 a joint. Then you've got to do testing works, and then you've got to actually switch it on to power whatever you need to power. This particular job was a small 132,000 volt cable at Walpole St Mary's in England. The cable contractor was a company called Balfour Kilpatrick, who I was representing and working for as an engineer, but also as a researcher, basically. It was the extension of a substation. There was a new gas turbine power station being built close by, and by Enron, who no longer exist. And so the cable from that power station had to, the substation had to be extended. It was a small, relatively generic project because it wasn't too complicated, fairly simple, £250,000 for 10 weeks. The client was National Grid, who are the company that supply the infrastructure for electricity in England and the UK. They were also supplying some of the ancillary structures, the steel work for the cable to go up the pylon and other things. The contractor and the client had a standard quality system, ISO 9002, because this was done in the 90s. And it was also under construct, design and manage regulations, which are effectively safety regulations that came into the UK about that time as well. Here's some pictures of the site. On the top left you have the view from the pylon where the actual cable was going up. Below you can see the winch, the tractor winch that would pull the cable into the trench and then feed it up the pylon. On the bottom left you've got the cable drums there. You get a little bit of sense of proportion. One of the test engineers standing there close to the fence. These are sort of 20, 25 ton drums of cable. It's very valuable. The lead time for the cable is about a year to be manufactured. So measuring, checking its right size and the right specification is very important prior to going in. And then the picture on the right you see from the cable trench, the 3 cables and the bond cable that have gone in. And these cables go along past the tractor and then up the pylon to a platform which is about 10 metres from the ground. And this platform was erected by National Grid's own staff. During the job I was up speaking to the jointers, the people that join the cable together at the top, and they found there was discoloured flanges and stocks out of the jointing kit. Interestingly, the quality assurance engineer said he was not responsible for this, for resolving this. His purpose was actually just to check that we were implementing the quality system, but not to actually do anything about a potential problem with quality of the actual components. So it was interesting that we weren't allowed to question the validity of the auditable quality system. It was so The interpretation of quality, even within the company, even within a project organisation, has some interpretation and can be misinterpreted, and actually the purpose of providing a quality product or service sometimes gets lost in that mix. One of the biggest problems was that National Grid provided the steelwork to guide the cable from the ground up to the platform. This had been modified. Normally these platforms were 6 metres up, this one had to be 10 metres up, so that's round about 30 plus feet from the ground, and that was where we had the close miss. The contract, as I say, it was the platform was 10 metres above the ground. This is a shot from one of the platforms to the other one, and you can see the ceiling end, as it's called, the porcelain that takes the power up to the pylon, and the cables underneath that. The platform was very poorly designed. The steel supporting structures had to be reworked twice on site because they'd been poorly designed and poorly erected as well. And the platform had been erected by National Grid's own personnel. Now they were disgruntled because they had actually been second choice to do this. The original contract had gone out to contractors who were too busy, and so it had eventually come back to them, so they felt they were second choice for actually doing this job. And so this also led to the mix in that the platform had been put up poorly, so there was human resource issues with this and industrial relationship issues that led to the near miss, the incident that happened. What was the near miss? Well, we had one of National Grid, the customer's engineers, was up on the platform watching the cable being connected from the overhead line to the cable, and he was standing on the platform, and all of a sudden the platform floor gave away, just like he was in a hangman's gallows or a hangman's platform. He fell through the platform. Fortunately, he was a larger gentleman, and he got jammed as he went through. But the plate fell through, narrowly missed beheading two of the guys working underneath, two of my workmen working underneath. Then it hit and damaged the cable. The engineer was left dangling basically 10 metres above the ground, and if he'd fallen he'd have been, if not killed, seriously injured. Very interestingly, he did not want to report this incident. He didn't want to report it as a near miss because there was a blame culture in evidence. Again, it goes back to this idea of admitting to mistakes. Obviously it wasn't his fault that the platform had collapsed, but people were at fault. And the problem was, rather than looking at that saying, okay, we did wrong, we've got to do something differently, they wanted to blame someone. And unfortunately that's where, again, quality systems can fall down. We don't have the ability to self-reflect and actually look for solutions rather than look to blame. Cable had to be repaired. We offered to repair the platform as the contractor on site. The offer was accepted. Despite this, after all what's happened, the National Grid project engineer asked for the quote to be as cheap as possible. And at no time did we have any follow-up action regarding the poorly designed steelwork, the suppliers, the National Grid's work putting up the platform. There was no lessons learned taking place at any point in time, despite both client and contractor being ISO approved, and the facility for this just didn't seem to exist. And that was pretty sad because you thought this could happen again quite easily. So it was all too apparent this could happen again. So again, learning is difficult because also projects are finite. The personnel move on after the project finishes. Sometimes personnel move on before the project finishes. And sometimes the actual organisation, the project organisation, loses this knowledge. And what we need to do is try and capture the good and the bad. Actually, the bad is better. We tend to learn from our mistakes, both at a project level, but also an activity, event level as well. And this is what led me to think that maybe we should be looking at alternative complementary models rather than just relying on standards. So this is where I was trying to look for an alternative model using a knowledge-based quality system. First, so I was looking at methodologies and tools that would capture behaviour, capability, feedback, and also promote learning in projects as well. So it wasn't just, so audits, for example, weren't just snapshots. There were more videos where we reflected on what we did in a project, but it fed forward as well. And also the learning was kept in the organisation too. So I started to look at a systems approach. I work partly in the management science department at Strathclyde as well as the business school. So I have been looking at my PhD was now a management science area because that's what I did as my first degree. So I started looking at systems thinking, looking at the tools that are used in systems thinking, the techniques like examining your mental models, causal loop diagrams, systems archetypes, which are quite often associated with Peter Senge. I also looked at system dynamics as well as a sort of progression from systems thinking, and I used the software to try and model some of the behaviours I witnessed, although I did tend to just use the system dynamics software as a tool to illustrate things. I didn't really sort of go on to then use it and study further projects. Maybe that's something for the future. I also am a great fan of soft systems methodology, the work done by Peter Checkland in creating rich pictures and using the Catwo mnemonic and looking at virtual systems and then trying to bring these back into the real world as well. Also part of this merged into the complementary areas of organisational learning and knowledge management, and particularly looking at double loop learning, the idea that we reflect so that actually we change things. We don't just repeat the same mistakes, we actually change systems and processes and hopefully make the future projects better. This is quite a detailed slide, and apologise for that, but what I did was I took Peter Senge's shifting the burden archetype, system archetype, to illustrate the behaviours found in the contractor, Balfour Kilpatrick, who had actually had an industry standard quality system. And what was interesting, I haven't got the time to go into it here, but what was interesting was that Balfour Kilpatrick had a quality system that the employees used to circumnavigate to make the project better. So they knew they had to do certain things to the quality system, which they did to tick a box, but they used to do other things which they didn't include in the quality system and actually hid from the auditors, which made perfectly good engineering sense and actually improved the operation of the company and made better projects. But the quality system was so inflexible that it couldn't include the things that they actually did. So they used to circumnavigate the quality system, which was a real shame because you could have had a far better quality system if some of the good practice they did was incorporated into it. So there was a fundamental flaw with the quality system, that it didn't actually measure good practice and capability. And again, I think this is where sometimes quality systems need to be a bit more flexible and try and encompass these things as well. Not all companies have this problem. A lot of companies actually don't have any issue with this at all, but particularly in this particular company and others like it, I think that's a big issue for them. So how do we move to project learning, which is effectively double loop learning? Well, what you want to highlight, as I've said already, are the unusual events and also the good events as well. Highlight the positive and the negative. Then use that for individuals to adjust their actions in response to new information and alter their mental models, which is double loop learning at an individual level. Then you actually look at the possibility of changes in the shared mental models between the project team. So that's everyone looking at what's gone wrong, altering how they think, and that should then lead to organisational learning or organisational double loop learning, which again feeds back to the next project. And how you capture that and move forward. Now, obviously, this depends on not having. It depends on having a blame-free culture. It also allows what John Seddon very creatively calls creative anarchy to flourish. So it allows for good ideas to surface and actually be used and utilised without being restricted by a formal quality system. And if the quality system is good, it should then feed into it in the future. What I did was I adapted, when looking at this, I adapted Duran and Greina's feedback loop to try and look for the key parts of what a knowledge-based quality system would consist of. So they showed a process which led to a sensor and a comparison, and the actuator, typically things that come from control engineering, and also a goal. So what I did was I superimposed my ideas of, okay, where are the key parts of an alternative knowledge gathering quality system? So the process becomes a project, the goal becomes a successful project, but at the second level you have knowledge gained from gathering information in the highs and lows of the project as well, which then feeds forward to in the project process. So here's taking that another step further. The actuator, for example, becomes a flow of knowledge from the previous project events, from the synthesis of previous and existing projects, and moves forward to create theory leading to a more informed choice of action in the future. I've put here, as every project is unique, the outcome of past actions can never be taken for granted when used elsewhere, although it should be able to reduce risk. The comparison section, that compares existing knowledge with what has happened in this project and adds to knowledge or learns about other ways in which an activity or project can be tackled. The goal is the background goal is to add to the project organisation's knowledge database, improve their capability by knowledge. Now that capability can either improve future projects or it can increase the project's organisation's capability to do wider projects out with their normal scope. Finally, I've taken all of this and I've tried to identify the relationship between risk and a knowledge-based quality system. And here I've used, again from the systems world, causal loop diagrams. And the idea is that existing quality initiatives don't really account for risk, which is really an inherent part of project management. You can never get rid of risk completely. In operations management, you can reduce risk substantially just because you've got a lot of repetition. But in project management, risk is an inherent thing. An ideal knowledge-based project management system would recognize a link between risk and knowledge. So if you follow the causal loop down from the top, you have the experience of the project team, and that feeds into a bank of knowledge. The more knowledge they have, then could reduce the risk of something going wrong, or it can also simultaneously increase the project organisation's capability, which then in theory feeds into increased project success. Obviously if you increase the project organisation's capability and they try new projects, that could also increase the risk as well, so there's a bit of a paradox there. But if you increase the project success, that then feeds into more diverse projects and also unusual events as well. The unusual events feed into your knowledge database, and it's a virtuous cycle. Expanding this further and making it into a bigger model, you can see here, you can follow it down, you've got the organisation's culture. Now their organisational strategy, it depends on, project organisations can be quite conservative and therefore stick to fairly defined projects, or in some small companies, in which I've done case studies on, which you'll see from my PhD, which you can access online, some small companies actually have got a very, what I've called with my supervisor John Bowers, a high degree of adventure. That they're quite capable of taking on risk. They've no problem with taking on risk, and so therefore they're quite happy to do this. And actually then if they do this, if they've got a high degree of adventure, this increases their bid scope, or it might actually increase their operational efficiency and their capability as well. And if they do more unusual projects out with their usual scope, that means the project challenges are greater, so there's more unusual events, which again feeds into the organisational knowledge. But at this stage of the model, I've realised that actually this also feeds into project risk. It could increase project risk, which may also decrease project success. But you're still learning. You're still getting experience, which then feeds into organisational knowledge. If you break down each part into A, B, C and D, as you can see in the diagram there, in the causal loop diagram, If the organisation has a lot of relevant experience, it can be used to solve the project challenges and reduce risk. The ability of the organisation to learn from past projects, the good, the bad, and the ugly, should we say, depends upon having an appropriate mechanism for capturing and transferring those experiences. Now, with all the technology we now have on hand, which wasn't around even in the 80s and 90s when I was an engineer, there's more than ever, there's mechanisms for capturing and transferring knowledge in a variety of media and forms. Some, as I said already, some organisations are more willing to take on new types of projects, so they have a high degree of adventure. That's not the same for all project organisations. And for Part D, which looks at the bid scope and the challenges, that depends on the project organisation's size, the commercial environment, and organisational strategy, that either of these attributes can be valid. Okay, just to conclude quickly, because I realise I'm coming up to the end of my 45 minutes, quality in the context of project organisations, I believe, should be redefined in terms of their capability, as opposed to their adherence to standards, how they deal with previous project challenges, and those can be things where projects have gone wrong. They should have a portfolio of how they dealt with them to show to clients. Organisational strategy, their degree of adventure, are they risk averse or are they adventurous? And they shouldn't be damned either way. It should be put in the context of what they've had to deal with in the past. Project learning infrastructure, how they capture knowledge, particular failure. Do they utilise double loop learning? Do they learn from their mistakes? And how do they increase their bid scope or efficiency in making projects routine, unique projects routine? That's my hypothesis, that's my world view. Thanks very much for listening, and as I say, if you'd like to explore this topic further, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I'm based in Glasgow for work, or if you're ever in Crieff in the Highlands, feel free to visit me there. My mobile number's there and my email, and yeah, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask, that'd be great. Thanks very much for listening. I'll just hopefully pass you on to Tim now, and that's about it. Thanks again.
Hi Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, Tim, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that session. It was most enlightening and amusing in part, so thank you very much for that. The first question we have came fairly early on, actually, and it was from one of my colleagues here at the Association of MBAs, and it's simply, does that mean that British standards testing is now outdated and irrelevant?
I think it is, yes. Not in its entirety, obviously. I mean, but shown there for the toilets, yes, it is. It was interesting that program and that range of programs showed that actually the inability to look at ourselves and say, flushing a thing that looked like a large table tennis ball down a toilet is not really how they look. Sadly, we tend to get a bit obsessed about this and not look as to what the capability of the actual product or service should be. I'm not sure if shires are still in business, which maybe says something in itself. And certainly the UK toilet, I don't think has changed much either. And yet the designers found that in Japan there's a huge range of things that can be done to a toilet to make it better, not just aesthetics. I think the problem is that designers are seen as making something look pretty, whereas Seymour Powell were quite keen to stress that actually it was about making something work better for the consumer, which I think that in the UK we're a bit hidebound, we're a bit rule-bound, and we need to actually look outside a bit more at what other countries do and other people do, and adopt these practices. But I do confess I've not been around a toilet factory recently to find out. But if anyone has, feel free to get in touch with me. I would like to be enlightened about this. Does that answer your question?
It does indeed. I'm getting nods from around the room, so thank you very much.
You'll not look at a toilet the same way again.
We've got a second question, again from one of my colleagues. And with small to medium companies, how does one implement these capability testings and test it in itself to make sure that they're fit for purpose?
I think most small companies actually have got a better handle on this than large companies. I think small companies tend to be more proactive. They possibly take more risks, but they are good at actually trying things. One of the case studies I did in my PhD was with a small construction company who actually specialised in flood prevention, and they were very innovative. They used to look at different industries as to how to pick up technologies that they could use in their own industry. Now this is going back to the 80s, and I remember doing some research in this small company, and one of their staff had gone to a site a few hundred miles away to look at what the next project was going to be, and he came back to the office and he took out a large suitcase which had an early video camera, and this thing was massive. It was like a TV camera from the BBC, and he showed the video of the site, and so all the guys in the company sat around the TV and watched the site and said, oh, we need this, we'll need that, oh, it's going to be a wet site, so we need pumps, we need this. Very quick to adopt technology, and I think an innovation and actually use it, quickly. And I think actually small companies are better at this and better at testing things and trying things out than large companies, who tend to be it's project management by committee, which I always think is a dangerous thing. I mean, to me, a good project manager is a benign dictator. Someone at the end of the day has to make the decision about whether something works and how they're going to test it. And I think sometimes small companies are better than that at that than large companies. I think large companies, maybe through corporate governance, maybe through their sheer size, don't want to find innovation more difficult. But it does depend on industry. I mean, typically my experience has been in construction and IT latterly. But it does vary from industry to industry.
Good, thank you very much. I think that answers that question. I've just had a question come through from Peter Zip. Thank you, Peter. Give me a moment to just read this.
Sure.
Okay, so it says, this all makes sense. The problem is that you, like many of us, will be labelled as a heretic. Our biggest problem is not perfecting a new way, and you have certainly made a lot of progress in this direction already. But in overhauling the deeply entrenched mindsets, especially in the public sector, can you comment on that, Peter, please?
Absolutely, yes. I'm fully with you, Peter. Yes, I am that heretic. I would assume you've read John Seddon's early books and maybe the later ones as well. When I was doing my research, I came across John Seddon's book, which is about ISO 9000, and he was highly critical of ISO 9000, as I have been in the past, and some existing quality systems as well. And I think he came out with a very good statement, which mainly only you understand if you're listening in the UK, but he came out with this lovely quote from one of his respondents when he was doing this research, saying that criticising quality is like criticising the Queen Mother. It's not the done thing to do. And it is. It's very much about the quality system is implemented. We have these quality systems. We've been audited. We pay vast amounts of money to actually implement them and be audited. We have this certificate on the wall, so therefore quality's taken as read. It's there. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean that you're going to get a quality project or a quality service or a quality product. And yes, I mean, obviously being in academia or previously being in the private sector, the academia is the public sector, and yes, I think you're exactly right. I think the quality systems that exist in the public sector are not particularly good. I think ironically, there's a lot of reflection needs to take place in organisations about traceability and accountability in the public sector, which we don't do particularly well, I think, in some areas. That there's lots of bureaucracy surrounding these things, but I think there's also a lot of lack of traceability in a number of areas that's not been addressed. Interestingly, one of my hypotheses, one of the areas I'm enjoying looking at just now, are actually projects in the voluntary sector and the not-for-profit sector. I have the hypothesis that projects in this area, which are very intangible compared to some in the private and the public sector, but I believe that voluntary organisations and NGOs are faster, leaner, quicker, more efficient, better quality, provide better quality projects than both in the public and the private sector. I think they're very good project managers simply because a lot of them depend on short-term funding. They have quite often have volunteers as workforce who they manage to motivate and achieve huge things and achieve very great things, which typically slip under the radar as far as public relations are concerned. And I think both the public and the private sector can learn a lot about project management and quality from NGOs and the voluntary sector, but it's maybe not a particularly sexy thing to look at. Certainly Peter Drucker in his latter years pointed towards this area as an area to watch, although I think at the time he was much derided. But no, yes, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, Peter, but no, I agree, yes, I'm definitely a heretic in the quality side, no doubt about it. And you're also right in saying that some of the things I've talked about have moved on, and certainly some of the newer quality initiatives like EFQM, and also in production you've got Six Sigma as well. But interestingly, again, I am a little bit wary of some of the new systems and new methodologies because there is a sort of zealousness appears around them and an industry appears around them, and I think that's something that needs to be knocked in the head a bit, and there needs to be a bit of sort of questioning of these things, because a lot of quality systems do have good aspects to them, but I think what you've got to do, you've got to cherry pick and take out of them what you need and disregard the rest, which again may be heresy, but hey-ho, that's my viewpoint and my worldview, so I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter and Peter, for the question and the answer. We've come to the end of the session today. Thank you very much for listening to this, and thank you very much finally to Dr. Flett for outlining this particularly interesting topic. The slides and the audio will be available after the webinar, and also if you want to contact either Peter or myself separately, then please do. If you haven't seen it already, please do take a look at our newly launched Careers Development Centre, which is online at mbaworld.com, which is our website. We've got some up-and-coming webinars, so if you've got a pen and a piece of paper handy, the next one is the Global Connections to Fusions of Institutions webinar. That's on the 10th of September from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Secondly, we've got a webinar which is part of the Global Connections program as well. That's Creativity and Innovation, and that is on Thursday, the 26th of September from 11 till 12 in the morning for an hour. So thank you very much finally again to Peter and to our Global Connections Ambassador Hanan Sharan, who organised this with us. And I'll be saying goodbye. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.